From the massive studios in Raleigh, North Carolina, this is the Cloudcast with Aaron Delp and Brian Gracely, presented by A Cloud Guru, bringing you the best of cloud computing from around the world.
Good morning, good evening, wherever you are, and welcome back to the Cloudcast. We are coming to you live from the massive studios here in Raleigh, North Carolina. You know, we get a chance a lot to talk about sort of new technologies. We talk about new architectures, and sometimes there's parts of technology that we sort of assume are going to stay the same forever. Part of operations, you know, they're going to stay the same forever. We have to do them. And then every once in a while, some very interesting innovation comes along, and we have to rethink some things that we know we have to do as part of IT. And we really want to think about, is there a better way to do it? And so today, very interested, there's a company that sort of popped up on our radar, has been getting a lot of press these days, that we really wanted to take a look at and really dig into. So very excited to have both Andrew Miller and Ken Hui from Rubrik join us today. Guys, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Brian. Glad to be on again.
Appreciate it. My first time.
Yeah. So Ken, you've obviously been on quite a bit. Been a guest on the show. You've been a co-host on the show. But Andrew, first time for you. Why don't you give us a little bit of your background, and maybe both of you guys give us, because we've known both of you for a little while, but give us some sense of why you're over at Rubrik these days. What's exciting about the space, and what's exciting about the company for you?
I think Brian, you and I first met back in maybe a Vero madness, but I started on the customer side for 7 years. Kind of admin to engineer to architect in a data center with virtualization and storage and backups and networking, just an awesome broad base. Then was on the partner side, actually with a company named Vero, where we met. And partner side was about 8 years, kind of SE to manager to director, and took a little bit of time off. And in joining Rubrik, it was frankly about, I've been on the customer side, partner side. To be honest, I hadn't done the vendor side before, so there's some like personal growth there. There was also the aspect of like, where do I want my career to go? It's toward cloud type stuff. I see Rubrik moving there while it leveraged some of my own background. And as well, actually, technical marketing was a little bit of a risk for me, because I'd done related things, but I'd not done this before. So the challenge of doing, kind of stretching myself at a personal level and being able to build out a team was really exciting. And I should definitely mention folks like Chris Wall and Kyle Frank. I mean, there's some really sharp folks here that I get to work with. So that's the relatively short answer.
Yeah, very cool. Ken, you've done a lot of things. I mean, you've been in OpenStack. You were looking at containers at one point. What's drawn you over to cloud data management lately? Yeah,
I think most of the Cloudcast listeners will know I've been involved in the OpenStack space for a long time. Was getting into containers, and then also getting involved with public cloud, particularly around Amazon Web Services. But I actually started my career kind of back in the data center, doing systems administration and lots of backup admin work. And like you had mentioned earlier, I thought that space was never going to change. It was always going to be a pain. And then I heard about Rubrik, found out what they were doing, really liked the concept they had of changing the way data management and data protection should work. And then was really attracted to the idea that they were somehow integrating that with the cloud in more ways than just kind of dumping backup data. They're actually using it in a meaningful way. So I started looking at Rubrik, saw that they had Andrew and Chris Wall were building this great technical marketing team. So I thought I would find out more and decide to sign up.
Very cool. Yeah, I know, a few years ago, I've seen Chris Wall go over there. And for folks that don't know Chris Wall, Chris, very, very smart guy, also runs a podcast called Data Nauts, which I highly recommend. I think it's DATANAUTS, sort of like astronauts. I saw him go over there. I said, okay, went to a storage company, hadn't necessarily thought about it too much. And then I start seeing, here's a company in the cloud management space takes a big round of funding, then takes another big round of funding. And then I'm sort of hearing these stories about, we're hiring 100 people a quarter and so forth. And I start going, wait a second, this is kind of strange, because, the VC funding tends to have shifted away from infrastructure, or at least feels like it shifted away from infrastructure, feels like it's shifting more towards things that are enabling the public cloud, hybrid cloud, and so forth. And it was like, okay, what's going on with this company, and what makes it different? So give me a sense, guys, like what, Ken, you talked about, you didn't think this space was going to change, data management, backup, and so forth. Like, what is sort of radically different about Rubrik that is driving all this VC funding, all this hiring, and so forth?
So I'll start a little bit, and then I'll let Andrew jump in, because he's actually been there longer.
Okay, sure.
He can probably share a little more stories. But I think the key thing I saw there was, again, they weren't looking at just kind of doing backups, but they were really looking at, can we help customers get data over to the public cloud? And once it's there, can they use it for something useful? So example would be, I've got all these VM backups. Now, can I use it to spin up test dev or DR in any of the public clouds? And that was what really attracted me, this idea of using these public cloud use cases with data that you've kind of backed up from on-prem, and then doing it in any of the big three public cloud vendors. I
think this is actually kind of the question that like Ken and myself and Chris and even Rebecca fits you on our team. I mean, we all asked when we were looking at Rubrik, because it's like we didn't necessarily want to join a backup and recovery company. You're absolutely right. VCs seems like are not investing in traditional infrastructure companies. It's really clear internal discussions that like, there's not investment in hardware companies, there's not investment in backup and recovery companies. So I mean, we can't look like that, but more importantly, we can't be that. And that goes toward dramatically simplifying stuff that people need already. Because I mean, you can't not have backup and recovery in some ways, but saying that that's not the purpose of the company, that's a big use case. And then that's the first use case. And then the next use cases go into like native cloud integration. There was even this interesting interview with Bipul Sinha, the CEO, way back before, like around the founding of the company, where one of the starting things was around him looking at cloud blob storage and thinking, okay, this is like a really cool resource, and like how can people actually use this in a worthwhile way? And if you look at Rubrik, that's where, as Ken mentioned, there's native archiving to the cloud, and then some intelligence there, like when you have to do restores, you don't have to pull everything back out of the VMDK, that kind of thing. So the core of it is that simplifying a lot of stuff that people already need, giving them a bridge to the cloud. And then from a vision perspective, and this is where it gets risky, is that if you've got a big pool of data, a lot of interesting things you can do to help customers unlock value out of it.
So I want to add too, I think one thing we're definitely seeing, I don't think VCs are interested in investing in just infrastructure companies, but they are interested in investing in companies that are solving big customer pain points. And the three things I'm definitely seeing pain points wise is no one likes a backup solution, or very few do. Data management is a pain, and even more of a pain when you go up to the cloud. And everyone's looking for someone who can help them figure out how to simplify things and kind of remove that pain. And I think that's kind of where Rubrik's we've got a story we're trying to develop around this idea. We'll help people pain points.
Yeah. No, and that's always a great place to start with. Right? Start with customers' problems and try and solve those problems. Let's talk about the architecture. I've been doing a little bit of homework on it. Looking at a bunch of videos from things like Tech Field Day and other things that are on YouTube, and looking at white papers. Rubrik makes a claim that's basically like, we're not sort of doing things incrementally different. We're doing things very, very different in terms of how we do backup, in terms of how we can where we can place the data and so forth. So walk me through a little bit. I mean, we don't have a whiteboard in front of me, and we'll have some links to whiteboards, but kind of walk me through the basics of what Rubrik does that is so different, that obviously is getting a lot of people's attention. How does it compare versus some traditional sort of ways of backing up data, backing up virtual machines, things like that?
A lot of this for me is out of like my own personal background. Like I ran backup exec, I ran Tivoli Storage Manager, architect, Admiral data domain. Just like this is my personal history, if you will. So the biggest thing is focusing on simplifying. And that comes out in a couple architectural ways. The first is you take the hardware, you take the software, you put it all together. You do it in a system where you have a custom written file system, so it's scale out. You don't have forklift upgrades, that kind of thing. You've converged a lot of pieces in the stack. I'm waving my hands around here as I'm talking, right? The where you have the storage and the servers and the backup software, and even maybe kind of the tape drives too, because we can use cloud for that. So there's this convergence of a lot of different parts and pieces. And we've seen that, frankly. I mean, if you want to compare it in a way to, from the ground up to, 10 feet or something, it looks similar to some of what Nutanix did with hyperconvert.
Yeah, I mean, that was sort of what jumped out at me. It felt like there was some parallels to what's going on in kind of core infrastructure, right? So we've seen, silos of compute and storage kind of becoming what they call hyperconverged or HCI. I feel like you guys are doing that. The scale out piece is very interesting. It seems to simplify the operations, right? You just sort of add more capacity without having to think about adding more capacity as you typically do. Is that sort of the beginning of where it becomes different?
Yeah. So the scale in particular, I think. So one of the things that when we talk to enterprise customers in particular, that sometimes they have a little trouble wrapping their head around is they're so used to this idea that if you're using a traditional backup software, there's like a master database catalog that manages all the backup jobs. And if something happens to that backup server or those catalog database, basically you're toast, right? And in this architecture, there is no master server. Every node, it's like a true distributed architecture where every single node has all the information it needs. And it's kind of all the intelligence distributed. That's why you can lose nodes and things will keep running. We can add things and we don't have to worry about like hitting a limit on a single server. That's the master server.
Yeah, I think it's interesting. Some of the new companies that are emerging, especially the ones that their architecture is essentially distributed. A lot of things that happen in our industry, you tend to see people that stay in a certain segment for a long time. So you'll see the founders of a company. Well, we started a company, then we sold it to NetApp, or we sold it to EMC, and then we started another company, and then we sold it to another one. And what we're seeing now is the founders and the core engineers are coming from places like Facebook and other places or Google, where distributed systems are at the core of what they do. And so I think you're getting a very different sort of look at how to deal with these problems. And, like people say, the traditional problems in that I got to back up data, I've got to archive it, I want to recover it. But I'm looking at it from, like you said, sort of a cloud native approach where I'm distributing the software, I'm taking single points of failure out. That's a big deal. And it is a big change from how things have been done in the past.
There's a great Tech Field Day 12 presentation by one of the founding engineers who came from Google, actually was involved in like the Colossus file system, where he walks through his experience there and how he applied that in building the Rubrik file system. So you're absolutely right on like similar design principles and even people doing it.
The other thing that jumps out at me that's different is the storage industry went through a big change of managing tapes as being the backup sort of target to disks, and people like Data Domain really kind of changed that paradigm. They were able to use disk drives. They were able to do deduplication in interesting ways. They were able to bring cost way down so that people said, okay, the cost of this new medium is on par generally with the other medium, or the cost plus the time to recovery is on par or better. You guys are changing that once again, where the cloud becomes, the public cloud becomes a target. And I think you're incorporating Flash in some new and interesting ways. Can you talk about kind of how you're changing the medium piece of backup and recovery?
Yeah, so there's kind of two pieces there. The first is, and this even goes back to like my own personal history of coming in each morning and being the guy who had to deal with like failed backup jobs and that kind of stuff. So we're moving first, and this now relates to cloud, to if you think about like declarative versus imperative models, where it's like, you set a policy and the system manages everything for you. In this case for us, it's about, how often do you back up and how long do you keep it for, and where does it get archived and when and replicated and when, that kind of thing. So it's first and foremost about not having to manage jobs and tasks. And I've got a bunch of customer stories there about like hours down to 10 or 20 minutes a day managing stuff kind of. But that then relates into, because if you're not having to manage it at that kind of granular level, and you have Flash in the on-premises appliance kind of thing, and you've got cloud as an archive target, you're setting the policies that, and then the system is figuring out, okay, X amount of data needs to stay on site for faster restores, but for longer term archive, X amount should live out in the cloud, that kind of thing. You've even got then capabilities too around, we were able to do live mount off the box, and I've had, customers with like 5 server environments that have been hit by ransomware, and they can bring them back up within, 15 minutes kind of thing by being able to leverage mounting virtual machines directly off Rubrik, storage vMotioning in the background, that kind of thing. Not primary storage, but it even, if you simplify the front end stuff enough, it can even tie into some really interesting recovery possibilities that can be impactful way beyond the traditional backup and recovery teams. And
I think just in specifically the question of the public cloud as a medium, I think, like I said, I used to be a backup admin, and we sent tapes off to Iron Mountain just as a general practice. And the reality is we did that hoping or believing we would never actually have to use that tape because we knew it would take too long. But I think what's happening is we hit at this critical point where things like ransomware that Andrew talked about, with all these various attacks that we're seeing and natural disasters, is all of a sudden recovering from a disaster actually is a real thing that every company has to actually seriously think about. I've been at a couple of companies where we had disasters, and our solution was, let's get everything from tape off-site. And we realized by the time we get all that back and restore, we'll be out of business. So I think with the public cloud, you're getting, not only is it more cost efficient than sending things off to tape, but you can actually get things back faster. Or you can, in some cases, even use leverage the cloud to kind of spin up a new environment again. So I think that need to recover more quickly is causing people to rethink, is really like shipping things off to tape on a truck the best way to go? Or do we want to have something that you basically can get to 24/7 just doing some API calls?
Gotcha. So you guys you're really sort of shifting the focus from backup to recovery almost. Backup is fine and you have to do it for compliance reasons, but recovery is really where the value is, and just like you said, in terms of the changing dynamics of what's out there, whether it's ransomware or a failure or something like that. Let's talk a little bit about the public cloud. When you make public cloud, kind of part of the platform, part of what you expect people to use, people have to get comfortable with it. And, we've seen things like VMware is now finally kind of saying, okay, we'll accept that AWS is a valid target and we'll partner with them and so forth. But for a long time, a lot of the people that were very VM centric were fearful of the public cloud. What are you seeing in terms of your customers feeling comfortable using it? How are their best practices starting to change around using the public cloud? Like, how's that shift happening in your world?
What I'm seeing anyway is that a lot of people are kind of, in different, there's a trope to talk about the cloud journey, but we actually do see people on different stages kind of on that road to getting to the public cloud. So right now, what we're seeing, at least with enterprises, most of them are still kind of looking at public cloud as a place to store data, particularly archiving. So most of our customers, that's their first step. They've I'm moving off a tape. I want to put things in like S3 or Azure Blob Storage or Google Cloud Storage, but they want to be able to do it without having to change all their processes, right? Because that's painful. So, one of the ways we're gaining traction is with that declarative model that Andrew talked about, where it's there's very little that needs to be a customer has to do to actually get things archived out to the public cloud. So they kind of say, hey, my retention is going to be X on-prem, and then the rest of the time is going to be on the public cloud, and we kind of handle everything behind the scenes. So that's where most customers are. We are starting to see some more people who now that they have that data sitting up there, they want to look at maybe doing test dev, maybe disaster recovery, and then eventually production. And the concerns they have there is, I think, the one that's been there forever, which is I've got X amount of data on premises. How do I get it up to the public cloud in a cost-effective way and in a timely fashion? And that's another problem that we're trying to solve for customers.
And are you starting to see people say, hey, you've made it easier for me to get data into the public cloud, and maybe they are a VMware customer, for example, and they start to say, oh, the VMware on AWS cloud, because I can get access to my data, sort of blend the common processes together. Are you starting to see those things line up, or is it still kind of, how they might use the public cloud for dev and test is still kind of a separate thought process, essentially getting VM set up?
I think when I talk to, I go to a lot of Andrew too, and the whole team, we go to a lot of these VMUGs, and there's definitely interest in the whole VMware cloud and AWS. I think it's still early, and people haven't really bought off on it yet until they've kind of they want to look a little more at the architecture, get behind the dollar numbers a little bit more. But I think people are looking to see if they can do that as a beginning way to approach this. But I think for now, like I said, in terms of public cloud, is really just mainly focus on dumping data there because it's cheap, to be honest, and then let's start doing some test dev, maybe with some new environments, but in some cases with some of the stuff they're running on-prem. But I think it's going to take them a little while to where they'll be comfortable saying, I'm going to move all my production, even if it's running on VMware, onto the public cloud.
There's actually a story I wanted to add on there. I was talking with a friend who used to be a DBA. He's now an SCU. He's actually helping a customer with this, where a lot of times test dev hardware is challenging. Like if you ever had to provision that, there's always a need for more. So they're literally, in this case, they're backing up at a SQL level, database level with Rubrik in the cloud, and then using what's called SQL Live Mount, so you don't have to restore it. And then you can actually just mount SQL directly off Rubrik. And then they're firing up test dev instances with, free pay-per-drip hardware up in AWS. And it's actually had a pretty big impact on being able to do database validation, doing like schema validation for upgrades, that kind of thing. So it's like all these couple pieces put together, but basically as a pressure release valve around lack of hardware, recurring issues with lack of hardware for test dev needs in the data center. Just like when we started talking about that, he got really excited, and then I got excited when I saw a customer actually doing it.
Well, it makes a ton of sense. At this point, there's no real economic reason why you would want to have dedicated backup facilities. You can use the cloud. It's generally available in most geographies. You can set up things like Chef and Ansible to basically rebuild your server infrastructure. You could rebuild it on top of Amazon or Azure. And like you guys said, if your data or copies of your data is then, close in proximity, there's really no reason to have, a physical data center sitting around consuming CapEx resources, consuming power and cooling, or, just wondering if it's going to come up and run. Something is going to be there. So it'll be very interesting to see if now that the pieces are becoming simpler and simpler, like you said, people get comfortable with those sorts of things. What about anything else? Have you seen any other kind of noticeable differences as people are beginning to understand the public cloud as a target? Are they asking better questions about how to get data there faster, how to encrypt data? What other types of things are you seeing change as the public cloud becomes part of their day-to-day architecture?
Main thing I'm seeing and hearing sometimes is people asking better questions about automation and APIs, just because you're starting to think public cloud, you're going there mentally. We like that, frankly, just because you can do everything in Rubrik from an API perspective, but it's sometimes more just about helping people think holistically about let's start to make the assumptions that everything can be automated, driven out of a ServiceNow or vRealize Automate, or and like you mentioned, Chef and Ansible, or that kind of thing. But starting to, even if you have cool pieces down the infrastructure stack, that you're starting to think about how do I not interact with those, but how do I interact at a higher level from kind of an overall orchestration perspective, and more intelligent questions around that.
One of the things I'm seeing, beginning to see more of too, is as customers get more comfortable. So a typical customer will choose one of the three public cloud vendors and kind of do a lot of their archiving or their work on there. But over time, what I'm starting to see is customers start exploring, what if I run things on a couple of different clouds? Again, some of that has to do with concerns about lock-in. Some of that has to do with maybe one public cloud has services that they like more than another. And so I think they're starting to build some questions and some best practices around, if I want to use AWS and Azure, what's the best practice there? Is there particular workloads I should be running on one cloud versus another? And as you know, like each cloud has slightly different approaches to even doing, object storage. And so they're starting to have questions about, well, if I store things in Glacier and in AWS, how's that different from storing things in cold storage in Google? So we're trying to obviously help customers kind of sort that out so they can figure out what the best kind of cloud approach is for them.
Right. And you guys, for the most part, you sort of abstract those differences, right? They'd want to know what the difference is or figure out pricing differences, but in terms of abstracting them, they just look like a drop-down target on a menu for you guys, correct?
Yeah, so that's one of the benefits we bring is we like you said, we do abstract it, so it's you're just archiving to a Rubrik cloud target, and underneath the covers, we're talking with the different cloud vendors using whatever protocol that they require.
Right. The other example there is that when you take like VMs that have been archived into Azure or AWS, if you want to convert those virtual machines to run in Azure or AWS, it's obviously a different process between the two of them, but it's the same interface from a Rubrik standpoint, even though we're calling very different things under the covers. Now,
you mentioned VMs. As best I can tell, the solution is fairly VM centric. It works with VMware. It works with Hyper-V. It works with Nutanix's hypervisor technology. Obviously, there's a huge part of the market that's very VM centric, and there's a huge installed base. Are you seeing any interest yet in backing up container centric environments, or are you guys starting to explore it all? How you get involved with data or apps that are on containers, or is that not yet kind of on the radar screen?
I'm not talking to many customers, to be honest, that are asking about backing up containers. And I think there's a reason for that, right? I think as you know, Brian, you're in this space. I think we're just now really starting to see people think more carefully about stateful apps and how do you store state like properly and have it mapped to the right containers, like when containers are being supposedly moved around or terminated. So I think the standards are just starting to come into place to even figure out how to manage stateful containers properly. And there's actually no standard at all for how to back it up in any way whatsoever. So I think our approach is we're kind of monitoring things, but we're waiting for some of these standards. For example, coming out, like the storage working group coming out of the CNCF.
Yep.
And the stuff they're doing around container storage interface. As you know, that's so new that we think it's probably wise to wait for that to kind of mature a bit.
Sure.
And before we really get into, okay, so how do we actually talk with the CSI, for example, so we can actually get a good back up that stateful information properly?
Right. Yeah, and it is very new days. I mean, we're definitely seeing some side projects that are coming out. You know, people wanting to back up container registries, wanting to back up their kind of platform level stuff, the masters and etcd and so forth. But yeah, I can definitely see where it's a space that has a big amount of evolution. Andrew, you wanted to jump in?
Yeah, there's just one thing I wanted to. I mean, I've literally seen roadmaps and some discussions around container support. And you're absolutely right. We started from a VMware background perspective, but it's been like about a year and a half where we had to make some just judgment calls about engineering prioritization and saw way higher demand from our customer base around Windows and Linux support.
Sure.
SQL support, Oracle support, SQL Server, right, kind of thing. So those got prioritized higher to pull us away from, hey, just being VMware back, expanding out of those. There's continuing discussions, but I mean, I look at Jira issues periodically that have customer lists on them, and we're not seeing the customer demand yet around container backup, but we're pretty responsive from a roadmap perspective internally on that stuff.
Yeah, no, it makes sense. And you guys are focused both on kind of VM level as well as certain application level, it sounds like, in terms of being able to back up or crack open and see what's inside of things like VMDKs and others. Exactly.
So whenever we back up at a hypervisor level, we index inside the VMDK, so you can like just restore single files via just searching for. There's a law firm that has millions of files in their systems, and they were super excited about that a couple weeks ago. And then, of course, as well, when we back up at a OF level or at a database level, then we're doing indexing too in various ways.
Right. Yeah.
So from a container standpoint, I think my guess is we'll take a lot of cues from the application vendors. So what I mean is, for example, right now we back up Oracle databases, and we basically used RMAN facility that Oracle has within their database. I would assume they'll modify that to be useful in a containerized Oracle environment. So when that comes into play, I imagine we would likely look at that as an approach to backing up databases that are in containers.
Yeah, no, it makes sense. Well, listen, guys, I think we're gonna wrap it up there. For folks that want to engage with you guys, where's Rubrik going to be in terms of events, or maybe they can come by and see the booth and talk to you guys, or out on the road and so forth, or what's sort of the best way to kind of play around with the technology, maybe do a trial or an evaluation.
So I'll speak for myself first. I'll be at actually some vForum events over in Asia, Sydney and Singapore and Seoul kind of thing. I know that Ken, I believe, has some VMUG user cons coming up. We are very close to some to environments where customers can play around, kind of a la Community Edition. And right now it's more online demos, but we're getting close to where people can play around with it. But anything you want to add, Ken? Yeah.
So as Andrew mentioned, we're basically at every single VMUG UserCon, the whole team giving various talks. I'm going to be in the Portland and Silicon Valley VMUGs UserCons in a couple of weeks, and not talking about Rubrik only necessarily. I'm actually giving some community talks just about being a technologist, the life of a technologist.
Cool.
And then finally, we'll be at reInvent for the first time, so we're excited about that. And I actually have 2 sessions at the Partner Theater, so that would be a good way to come and hear about Rubrik and how we integrate the AWS.
Very cool. Yeah, reInvent's supposed to be almost 50,000 people this year. I think it's spread out across 5 or 6 or 7 different venues, but it'll be both in the Aria as well as the Mandalay Bay in terms of like the big show floors and so forth. So folks, definitely, if you're out there, swing by, see these guys, see Ken talk, does a great job with presentations and is always sort of willing to help out the community. So guys, listen, thank you so much for the time today. It was good to see, kind of really dig into what's causing so much enthusiasm, momentum around Rubrik, why the VCs are interested, and then obviously why so many customers are interested. So guys, with that, I want to thank both Ken and Andrew for being on the show, and for Aaron and myself, thanks for listening, everybody, and we will talk to you next week.
Thank you for listening to the Cloudcast. Please visit thecloudcast.net to find more podcasts, show notes, and everything social media. And visit acloud.guru for all your cloud training needs.